Hello, everyone. This is Jason Grant from Integral, and today I have with me Anna Gonzales, who is a senior graphics designer, visual designer at IBM, working with Carbon Design System, all the way from Austin, Texas, I believe. Correct, Anna?
Yes, Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. So Anna has been kind enough to join us and showcase a little bit of Carbon Design System and how it really works and how perhaps IBM use it a little bit internally. We'll play through this session and see how much value we can share to show off Carbon Design System and really the big sort of lesson for everybody here is using design systems for making better things faster, more consistently. That's a kind of general thing that we're trying to portray here in this session, and we're using Carbon Design System as an example of an enterprise design system that's being used at IBM. I mean, great giant global organization that's wrangling with lots of different complexities and challenges in design, which Anna and the team are resolving bit by bit. So, Anna, please tell us about yourself. I don't like to sort of introduce people myself because, if someone introduces me, they always end up telling a tiny little speck of my story or whatever. So I just pass it over to you to introduce yourself. Tell us, who you are. It's a tricky question, I know, but in the context of design, who are you and what are you working on these days?
Sure. So I am the senior visual designer on Carbon. I've been on the Carbon team for about 2 years now. The Carbon team really formed maybe like 2.5 years ago now. So it's on it since pretty much the start. But I've been at IBM for about 4.5 years now. I feel like I kind of got my feet wet there and pretty much know what's going on. I think that helps us a lot with making the design system and such. Um, I guess that's really, I don't know, all about me. I went to school for graphic design, so I've always been in the design discipline. I'm just really looking forward to share this with you guys.
All right, awesome. And so we've already had a session about Carbon Design System and the kind of a little bit of the history about it, and sort of how it came into fruition from Bethany Sonnenfeld, um, which is all on our YouTube channel as well. So, but tell us a little bit about, your kind of how you got onboarded to this system and sort of what your experience has been so far working with it.
Yeah, so Carbon's primary product that we serve is called, well, it used to be called Bluemix, and now it's just called IBM Cloud. So before I was on Carbon, I was actually working on the product side of things. So it's working for Bluemix just as a regular product designer doing UX and visual design for the product. And the Carbon Design team kind of came about because our team was growing so fast and there were so many designers on our product that things were getting inconsistent and everyone was just working too fast to scale up this giant product so quickly that naturally things just got inconsistent, and we realized there was a need to have a set of rules to keep everyone in line and sort of just enable people to work faster yet also consistently. So that's how this idea of a design system team came about, and we finally convinced our bosses that it deserved a full dedicated team, and it was great. We got like a huge team of 10 to be solely devoted to it.
Awesome. And so last time with Bethany, we covered quite a lot about the kind of strategic approach to the development of the design kit in itself, or the system. And but we didn't necessarily go so much into the, because like, what I find all the time, people ask me when I say I'm a UX designer or a designer of any kind, people straight away jump into the question like, do you use Sketch or do you use Axior or do you use this or that? And it's like, hold on. Like before you start discussing tooling and stuff, there's like a whole mindset and philosophy and all these things that need to be discussed before we can say, well, actually, it doesn't really even matter what tool you end up using, but there is, well, like always, somebody has a preferred tool. But so we looked at all the kind of philosophy and approach and strategy behind carbon design system, and I think a lot of people are now hungry and eager to find out how does that actually work in practice within the tool of choice. And nowadays we find that Sketch is quite a popular tool, if not kind of de facto standard. So tell us please a little bit about the structure of carbon design system in the sort of tooling sense once we're inside Sketch and so on.
Sure. I'm going to share my screen. It'll be a little easier to do it that way.
She slowly proceeds towards screen sharing button.
Okay. Is it sharing?
Yes, cool. It's all good.
So just so you can follow along, or you can go and get it later, on our website, which is just carbondesignsystem.com, there's a link out to our kit repo. And on here, you can download the kit straight from GitHub. And we keep all of our releases up on GitHub too. So for some reason we change something or you want something different, it's all backlogged on GitHub there for you. And then we write release notes. Obviously, you wouldn't need to download every kit every time sometimes. But as for the kit itself, it's pretty straightforward. We first just introduce it with a bit of getting started in case you're new to Sketch or just need to know the page structure. And then we introduce you to all of our styles. So these are things like our icons, our color palette, some of our typography rules and guidance, and then our larger scale IBM color palette in our type scale. Then we also have really cool things like preset grids for people to use. So they don't have to go in and set up grids themselves, which can sometimes be tedious, especially in Sketch, just getting those numbers just right. Especially since Carbon uses percentile margins, which just involves a lot of math. If you need to do the math on your own, we also show you how to do the math for you, so you can do it on your own and then enter the right values that you need, depending on what grid you're making. So we provide a whole range of default grid templates, so you could just grab one of these and go and start making based off of what you need. And then the next page, probably our most in-depth page, is just all of our components listed out in all their various states. It's one big long artboard. So it's pretty straightforward. Sorry, I was trying not to zoom around too much. Like here you can see all of our button variations. We try to include all the states for each component too. So if you're doing an InVision prototype or something else that you need statefulness in, it's pretty easy to show, and it's minimal work for all the designers making these things. So here you can see we have 4 different kinds of buttons, with each having 5 different states. So now a designer just doesn't have to think about anything about a button really, except for maybe resizing it if the text is different. We have our behemoth data tables in here with all of our different sizes and such. And just all of our components that we have on our website would be on this page. And then we also have some demo layouts for people. We get a lot of questions about how to make, or just like what does Carbon look like in a layout. We used to have product-specific layouts here, but reaching into such a broader audience, we've decided to sort of generify some of our templates. So just some super basic things like order form, a simple tabular dashboard, just some content-heavy layouts, and then again some more tabular dashboards. We also have data viz, and data viz comes with its own color palette. And the cool part about all these data viz elements is that we also have supporting code for all of these. So a lot of design systems just recommend styles for data visualization, but we actually have working code that supports all these styles as well. That will be like everything that we have in the kit will have a one-to-one code side for it. So it's not just theoretical designs, they're actually codified examples. And then we have this interesting concept that we call add-ons. These are sort of like subcomponents that we own that are product specific. So they're very specific to Bluemix, the product, or IBM Cloud, the product. So most other products or users would probably not actually use these, but since it's for our actual core user, we've included them in our kit. So that's a pretty high level overview of what the kit does from a base level. And then there's also some very interesting things that it can do from a not base level, I should say, or like that Sketch allows you to do. You can easily switch out components. So if I wanted to make this checkbox checked instead of unchecked, it's really easy to switch. In context, Sketch makes it super easy, which is one of the reasons why we chose Sketch as our tool. It just makes all these changes super easy to do. Even from a type standpoint, I could like change the type hierarchy pretty quickly if I wanted to change it from an alpha to maybe like a beta or even a giga or a gamma. It's super easy to change type styles. And even from a certain standpoint, changing out icons. They're a bit trickier though because there's color involved. So it's pretty cool. We put everything in here for you. There's multiple ways to access everything. You can access it from the symbols section, so you could drop things right into the artboards and get a button. And then you can also change, so you can see a little better. You could change the text really easy. Like obviously you wouldn't want to say primary button. So you could say add taco, and it's there. Obviously our rules, you could change the text really easy, but we'd have to also resize the button, which unfortunately at this very moment means that you have to break the symbol. But Sketch is actually doing some really cool things with their Sketch libraries and their new sizing modifications that we're working on. So hopefully that in the future, all these things get done automatically. You don't actually have to resize the button. One of my teammates, Taylor Aikens, she's actually amazing and has been working on setting all that stuff up. So hopefully all the stuff in the future, in a very near future release, actually auto resizes everything for you. Not everything, but a lot of things get resized for you. So yeah, that's kind of the basic gist of things. I'm trying to remember if I'm missing anything. Oh, and the cool thing, if you don't know this about Sketch, is like if I hadn't detached this from the symbol and I had gone into the button, oops. The cool thing about symbols is they cascade throughout the product or throughout the file. So if one day we decided that we didn't want this button to actually be blue, sorry, we wanted it to be red, we could quickly change it from at the symbol level. And these others aren't actually symbols. But anyways, it changes it from that level too. And if we went back to the component page, you'd see that one got changed to red also, without me having to manually do it. I could show you a slightly more impressive one by changing the checkbox. Okay. If I change this checkbox to red, instantly they're all red. So it saves everyone so much time if you need to change something like that. So having your file set up is really important for things like symbols and text styles and stuff like that.
Awesome stuff. That's a really good overview as to how it all works. So tell us a little bit about how do you handle these kind of situations where you need to change the style, for example, and like, tell us a little bit more about the architecture of the system in terms of the visual style versus structural architecture, so to speak, because I find that, like, in Sketch, it's pretty tricky to manage this. You showed a little bit of text style changes, and then there are the symbols. So, like, how are you managing this in terms of the text styles and visual styles versus symbols and sort of things that are baked into the symbol itself, and then sort of cascading the changes throughout the design? These are kind of things that pay off dividends or kind of catch us later on in the process of developing an app, when there is lots and lots of pages, and then there is, like, somebody decides the, let's say, I don't know, font type isn't quite right, and we want to change it across the whole app. And you're like, oh, if I haven't set myself out properly for this, I'm going to have to go through every single thing and change it. And then it's loads and loads of work. And I kind of want to do something else in my life other than design. So how do you manage this, and how do you maintain this coherence of structure?
Sure. So a lot of our stuff is set up through, like I said, symbols. And so hopefully most of that stuff, you don't have to break it at a symbol level. We try to keep it from a working standpoint. I feel like you have to break a lot of symbols just to edit them. But from a kit perspective, we try to maintain a lot of our symbols so that if we need to make changes on our side, they do cascade pretty quickly. And like I said, having those type styles set up pretty quickly helps you do it. From a production standpoint, we actually have a lot of, like, design tokens established, so that what might be tedious to do in Sketch is actually super easy to do in code. I think Sketch still, unfortunately, has a lot of manual, you have to still do a lot of manual updating. So I do think Sketch libraries is helping a lot with that. And like, there are cool things like overrides and such, like with text fields and things like this. Like, I can't remember if this is actually a symbol, but if I made this a symbol, creates a symbol. I could replicate this style as many times as I wanted to without actually changing the text. I don't know. So it never changes the text style. It's just changing the actual text in it. But I can still change it from a style level inside of this sketch file. So because it's a symbol, I could change it to, I don't know, dark gray if I wanted to. And now they're both dark gray. So I think having those symbols attached as much as possible and using overrides, these overrides, wherever possible, is like your best option. So you just keep that stuff consistent, but I can change this text as much as I want to. I don't have to worry about that. And they stay distinct, but still styled the same. So we're learning a lot of that stuff on the fly as we develop, and Sketch is always releasing new, sort of new features, I guess to say, and things like Sketch libraries that make all these things way easier. But I think a lot of stuff that you do in Sketch is still just, as much as I wish Sketch to be so magical, you still have to do a lot of manually updating, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible.
And so one of the things that I've discovered, or I'm battling with a client, not with a client, but battling in my mind for what to do for a client at the moment, is whether to use the design system as a template in Sketch, or whether to use it as an add. There's like an option to add as library. I know this is perhaps a little bit specific Sketch question, but it also implies the way the workflow ends up happening down the stream. So do you recommend that other designers who are working on specific enterprise apps within IBM should they use Carbon Design System as a like start from a template or add as a library, and why? Or have you considered this?
What do you mean versus the template versus the library?
So in Sketch, there is an option to start from a template,
Oh, okay,
and or there is like you can add the whole system as a library. And my
right.
understanding is that the library is like a shared file that kind of continuously updates itself on the symbol level, whereas a template as it is like a instance of a file at the beginning of the creation process, right? So it's kind of completely detached uh, from um, from the sort of updates going forward. Whereas if it's a library, if you add something as a library, it's kind of then subject to continuous revisions on the symbol level. So it's kind of like, I think these are the things that us designers have to kind of think about a lot in terms of the process flow of things, as opposed to just kind of like making things look pretty on the screen. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate and understand that it's like the process is almost more important sometimes than the product itself, because the product can get compromised on the structural level if the process is not followed properly. So any thoughts on that?
For sure. So we actually struggle with this right now because we're going through the process of actually making a sketch library. So the thing with the sketch library is that you have to have like a source file for it. And you obviously don't want people touching the source file because is like where it could get tricky. And because we have such a large team that we distribute to, we like really don't want people to touch that source library because things could get so out of whack. But at the same time, like having just a versioned template like we currently have that you have to like manually download, it also gets people out of sync because they're if they don't up download every new version of the kit, they could have some things wrong. And we've come across that before. They're like, there's this bug in the kit, or like, well, this is what the kit had, and we're like, oh, you're like on 2 or 3 versions behind, so unfortunately you need to update your kit, and then that would have been an issue. So sketch libraries resolve some of those issues, that those changes get cascaded out quickly, but yeah, there's that's still that problem of like the controlling the source file that we're actually still trying to figure out. So I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I think on smaller teams, sketch libraries would be extremely well, especially if you trust all of your teammates not to mess with the source file of that's attached to it. Um,
Yeah, and this is like the challenge here is that we as designers we are very inclusive people. We want to include others both in feeding back as to what we're doing, but also getting them to actually mull in and use the tools that we create for them. So then there is like some of us might be like contemplating about version controlling our design kit for hours and really thinking through the nuances of it, whereas other people are just like, I want to just make some pages and show it to my customer or client and get a sign off. I don't really so much care about the structure. But then if the project is going well, which you hope it will be, then they're having to make more and more pages and really keep themselves consistent. And the customer or client will be saying, why is that button green there and this is blue here? I'm getting confused. And it's like, well, it's just because I haven't clicked every single one of them and changed the consistent color. So you start getting quote unquote marked down as designer for your inconsistency, but that consistency comes from the system itself and keeping the process and the structure coherent, right? And so I find this because I also come from a full stack development background, and I'm familiar with tools such as HTML, CSS, and so on, and version control, and so on. So that's kind of solved. Those tools have solved a lot of these kind of niggles, but then those features and needs still exist at high level where we're not necessarily doing development and so on. And I feel like we're living in this world where we have powerful visual and architectural design tools, but they don't necessarily have the same power as the development tools. And then there's an element always of hacking the design process to kind of come together with the development process, and there's some sort of gray area where things don't quite align,
Right.
and then that's kind of where things can go array. So tell us a little bit more about kind of the things that you really like about Carbon design system, and how you might be typically working with, let's say, a specific enterprise app designer to sort of aid their design process.
Yeah. So I think that last problem you hit on, just the inconsistency between design and code, is like one of the big benefits of Carbon. As long as you don't stray too far from our basic styles when you're working in Sketch, what you mock up will basically look like that in code, just because we've worked so closely with our developers and everything to make sure that all of our code is like pixel perfect and exactly the way we intended it to be designed. So when you're putting together a larger composition, all the smaller bits work as intended. Where that's with the caveat that you didn't break all the rules in the sketch file. But for the most part, it works pretty well. And even if you did break a lot of the rules, we're implementing a lot of theming stuff into Carbon so that you can carry over those breaks even into the code side of things pretty quickly with very, very little work. What was the second part of your question? I forget.
I'm trying to remember myself now. How do you work with it? Yeah, it is. It's all come back. Hey, I'm not that old still to kind of. It takes a few seconds, but it comes back. So it's how do you work with individual, or do you work even with individual enterprise app designers to kind of help them align with what you're doing and use the most and the best, most power out of Carbon design system?
Oh yeah, we definitely do. We regularly partner with other designers in Bluemix or IBM Cloud, and also the greater IBM community. We do these things called Carbon sessions. Where they're just like little micro meetings that we have people sign up and they come in and we help them with their problems and sort of either show them how to use things correctly or recommend parts of Carbon to use instead of maybe making their own, or two, if they have a need that we don't fulfill yet, we work with them to sort of fill that need and figure out how we can help them and like what we can build sort of make their process easier. So it's a lot of give and take on that side. We're always checking in with all the other designers. We have like a big Slack channel that we discuss all these things in, and we're always answering just little questions, just quick little questions that come up about things, and just things you would never think about. Sometimes we're like, oh, there's no way anyone could ever have a question on a button again. We've documented so thoroughly. And then someone has like a crazy, insane, specific question. You're like, okay, that's fair. That's a good question. I never thought to ask.
I sometimes wonder if there could be some sort of general set of questions that everyone's ever asked about design systems and the needs that they've requested for them to have, and what kind of madness that kind of literature would be, and how big that would be. And it really goes back to kind of like how things are architected in nature. Often the time, I just kind of pull up a couple of fruits. Just give me a second. It's like, here is an orange and here is a tangerine, right? Are they the same or are they different, right? And then people are like, oh, it's just different. It's like, no, it's the same. And it's like, how is it the same? How's it different? It's like, oh God. Like I spent years of my life contemplating about that stuff. And then having to codify that into app design protocols on all levels, on architectural and visual, is super advanced skill, really. So tell us a little bit more about how do you, because you're a much more of a visual designer than, let's say, sort of a deep level information architect, which is probably like what I would describe myself more as. So from a visual design perspective, how do you validate that apps have been designed to your kind of expectations and standards, visually speaking?
Sure. So it's a little tricky to answer because there's very obvious things in visual design, especially in a design system that's easy to tell. Like if you're not using the right blue or something, it's pretty easy to tell straight off the bat. But other things are like, they're more ambiguous and sort of fall in the category of most right or even least wrong kind of set of times. And like sometimes, especially in enterprise software and with technical limitations, sometimes you just have to make not the best solutions for, like I said, technical reasons or even time constraints to get things out the door. So a lot of times it's just working through iterations of things and sort of iterating on a problem and having multiple variants and seeing uh, what actually works the best, and hopefully throwing some research in there sometimes to help with that. So I think iterating is like the best way I can help people sometimes when they come to me with a problem. Uh, a lot of times visual designs aren't working because something else in the flow is failing. Um, I'll give an example. Actually, we've had a lot of recent trouble with our text field inputs, people saying they look disabled, which is fair. Um, but one of the problems why so many people were thinking they were disabled was because they weren't allowed to hit the submit button. So the user can never like validate the text fields, and you can never get that validation message that was like, sorry, this field is required before submitting, type of thing. So even though the text field is also looked disabled, there's something else like in the flow that sort of made it, that aided to. I think it's really easy to blame problems on visual design sometimes without looking at the deeper root of things, or it's easy to like not value visual design. I don't know how to say that, but like since it's so superficial and everyone can see it, I feel like everyone has their own opinion on it, even though there's a lot of actual technical and almost like science to it. So a lot of times you just have to show people like the iterations to show, or even myself, I also have to iterate on something to see, since it is visual, sometimes you just have to see the examples and you can't just like talk about it. You have to do it for the thing to actually see what works best.
So this is actually an interesting point that you mention and raise. We're having a conversation now, and just there's no real kind of structure to this point now because it's all kind of relevant. But what I've found is, and I remember because I don't come from a visual design background field, and for me, it was like back in late 90s and early 2000s, and I am old enough to remember those. It was like just to make a web page, it was really like pulling teeth. There were no tools for coding. We were coding in just like text files, just text file, no kind of IDs and so on. And then to kind of like, you'd have to really kind of upload things to the server and then run it on a live system to see if it works, right? And so to even try things on the local host, it was virtually impossible. And so, especially kind of in a shared environment. So it was just to get the web page built, it was pretty hard. Then it came time when it was easier to build things, but it was like, it's no longer, the value is not in building a web page, it's actually building a web page that people can comprehend and use. That's why UX design arose as a discipline. But then it became a thing which is like, okay, it's no longer really like about building web pages and screens that people can use. It's about things that are usable and desirable, where visual design comes in as a much more kind of building block and a pillar of great user experience. Whereas in the past, we used to talk about a lot of it as like form follows function, right? And as UX designers, we'd almost brush it to the side, saying, the visual design doesn't matter so much. But with the advent of native apps and all these kind of much more refined interfaces, we now see that like visual design is much more of uh, integral part of great UX design. Without really deeply considering visual design, we can't at all sign things off and consider them as done. So then what that has led me to have to do is to really embrace visual design and best practices as a kind of a thing that's now part of really UX design proper. And so I had to start developing my own kind of eye for seeing if something's, let's say, 1 pixel in or out, or if the ratios are not quite right, because there's like things that look neat, but then there's things that look neat and appealing, right? And so on. It's kind of, I'm so probably describing all this in kind of very kind of primitive language, but I think you get what I'm saying. So the point I'm trying to make, and the question I'm asking, this is a big setup for a question here, is you as an extremely well-trained visual designer who have this kind of hawk's eye for spotting whether something's right or wrong, how do you work with people who are more like me, who is like, well, it looks neat, it's okay, let's just put it out there? How do you then work with those people to somehow train them or highlight to them why and where you're picking on things and making sure that things look not just right visually as in neat, but right as in neat and appealing and correct in a pure visual sense?
Uh, so I think it's just a matter of showing and telling again. Sometimes it's hard for me to explain why something doesn't work correctly. Sometimes I actually just have to show them. And so like a lot of times I'll just sit down with somebody and we'll like sort of literally push like some of their UI elements around, or we'll try like different sizings of things, or even a lot of times we'll throw even a different component or element in to get it to work better. I think visual design is one of those things that it's visual, right? So you just have to see it, and it's one of those things that you know when something's wrong, and then you just have to sort of work with it until it feels right. So that's why it's like it has some precise things like type scale and grid and stuff that are like mathematical, but I think a lot of visual design stuff is also a little bit intuitive. Um, I couldn't always tell you why something was right. It just like felt right, and it's like sort of a matter of getting the correct balance right within the design, and that's not so super quantifiable. Um, so I think it's just moving stuff around until it all clicks, and a lot of times that just takes I don't know you working with someone and to get it done. And I think sometimes that even I struggle with it. Sometimes you just can't get something to click right, and I think that's when you have to like take it back to sort of square one and like reevaluate um, the layout as a whole for whatever you're working on as a whole thing. Because maybe it's again it's something that's a deeper rooted problem than just the front visual side of things is why it's not clicking.
I think we went to the super nuanced territory here. So let me see if I can ask you another kind of nuanced question here, which is around, what is your kind of your day to day kind of activities working on carbon design system as a visual designer? Where do you see your biggest opportunities to add value to both the carbon design system as well as the process down the stream to kind of help with some of these things that we've already discussed?
Yeah, so I think the biggest value we have is making like systematic rules for visual stuff. Sort of like what we were doing in Sketch with the symbols. We're trying to do that across our entire system, code included, as these things called design tokens. So like we've already got it set it up with our color palette essentially. So we have everything categorized by like usage for our color palette. Uh, so then we have everything attached to what we call a single variable. So like our primary blue color is attached to a variable that's brand of one, and we've like systematically gone through the product and figured out like how all these colors are being used, and so that we can update that color really quickly if we wanted to, just like in the sketch symbol. It's like if we decided to change Brando 1 in the carbon design system, we just have to change that value in one place in the code, and it cascades throughout the entire carbon design system. So everywhere you saw that blue, we decided to change it to pink or something like that, it'd be there. So I think working from that standpoint, actually making super concrete visual rules that you can make rules, not just like theoretical visual rules, but also hard codified, like code values from, is important. I think always thinking about how the visual styles translate into code is a big thing, just because code does work very differently than some of like our traditional design practices. So just understanding even that helps a lot, like understanding how your visual styles will transfer to code. Even just things like padding and margin, all that stuff is like very different than how it's actually handled in Sketch sometimes. So um, I think just understanding the format that your visual designs are going to eventually live in is a big proponent of it.
So, talking of that kind of conversion from visually designed design assets to then the code, to what extent are you able to, for example, I think that one of the premises with Sketch, and I think this is like some of these tools promise these things, right? But then in practice, it becomes virtually not possible to do it, or just very impractical. But the idea, for example, if my app that I've designed with Carbon, for example, ends up having all these different types of colors, to what extent can I just export that out as some sort of CSS style sheet, and sort of serve that up to developers to avoid the conversations as to, or avoid having to do this work of going through every single color and then preparing a document on the side that's like the hex color of that is so, the hex of that is so. To what extent can we output from design, Carbon design system or Sketch in general, and serve a CSS file to developers? Or is that kind of still something that's quite far away from?
So we don't have that for Sketch, but I'll share my screen again. We actually do have something like that from a Carbon standpoint. So it doesn't export CSS, but it'll export those variables. So like I said, this is what we call our theme sandbox. And right now it's just colors, but hopefully in the future we'll have some more stuff attached to it. But like if I wanted to make a custom theme, I could go in here and, like I said, change these colors to whatever we wanted to. And at the bottom of this page, actually, you can export. We have this option to export this CSS or SCS SAS theme. And then you can plug that into your component code, and it will automatically take up these changes that we made with this pink color. So we're always trying to make some tools like that. I think this is like one of our coolest ones. It'll do it right there for you. It'll just export this code. If it actually opens up, I can show you what it looks like. Okay, well, I don't know what I just did. Anyways, but it should just be a SAS file that has like all those color variables inside of it. And then you just add that to your own file. It's pretty cool.
So theoretically, that kind of tool could then be used. So, for example, once the designer locks in their colors and so on that they're happy with, they can use that tool to specify them across the theme and then export that CSS file to then feed into developers and go, these are your colors that you need to plug in, and then kind of wrangle that code across the app. Is that correct?
Yep, that's exactly it. So we're making it a little more designer
you have
friendly.
dealt with that use case. It's not like quite outside of Sketch itself, because I've sort of thought about doing this from Sketch, and I think they use tools like Zeppelin to do this kind of in a way
Yeah.
that is, again, sort of it's just a little bit too messy, and I don't like this idea of like having to plug in yet another tool and yet another tool for things, and just like God, how many tools do we need to use to make a web page? It's but going back to, like, again, back in the day, the terrible thing of making web pages was you had to write them all in a text file. But then that was also beautiful because you just had the text editor and you make them. Nowadays, there's like 1,000,001 tools, and I'm still making a web page, for God's sake. So tell us a little bit about, to start sort of wrapping up, where do you see your, what are you focusing on for this year, for example, for Carbon Design System, specifically you as Ana Gonzales, the amazing senior graphics designer? What are you hoping to achieve by, let's say, the end of this year? Where can you see this going?
Yeah. So our big thing actually is the tokens that I was just describing, like with the colors. We're hoping to do that for a lot more stuff in the system. One, to make it easier for everyone to update styles, especially on our end, so we can just move faster from a product standpoint, and then like have those changes cascade across the system. And then also with the design tokens, we're making it more themable and composable for other people to use. So you don't always have to have, you can get all of our wonderful code without having to have our very specific styles with it. So just making it consumable for a larger product. So I'm really excited to work on all that stuff. We're taking a lot of inspiration from Salesforce, has done a lot of stuff with that design tokens in the past. I think it's a very interesting field or area within design systems, because I think it gets to like the heart of it. Like, not only are you making rules, but you're making rules that actually are systematically applied across the system. You're not just one-off hard coding each component that you, like you said earlier, the same problems that we have with Sketch, where you have to go in and change each value or each color value for each component. Instead, you can just do it one time and it cascades across the system. So I think that's like a big value proposition for design tokens and such like that. It just makes literally everyone's process faster and more streamlined and hopefully more consistent. I think it controls things more. I think it leads to less inconsistency, just because if you have those variables in place, it's a lot harder to override that than it is to override manually inputted value, sort of thing. So tokens, I'm really hoping to work more on some of these tools that we're making, like the theme sandbox that just facilitates better design understanding of the system, especially when it comes to the code standpoint. I know a lot of designers, I still struggle with it, understanding sort of the more in-depth code side to things, like even understanding like the theming and variables was a big hurdle for me. So I think working on tools that help designers understand that process better, even just tools that help facilitate a better conversation between design and development and stuff like that. So those are some things that we're going to work on this year that will hopefully be coming out and be pretty cool and exciting.
All right. And so just to wrap it up on a very, very unusual and weird question, because, hey, let's just think outside the box. When you're a grandma and you have your grandchildren, what are you going to tell them about what you were doing when you were at this age? And how are you going to explain that to them?
Sure. I'll probably tell them that I was very lucky and fortunate to get to work with so many amazing designers on my team. I love my team. The Carbon team is some of the best people I've ever worked with, both current Carbon designers and developers, and unfortunately people that have also already left our team. So to do such innovative work with such a great team, I think that's probably what I'll talk about, because I think working with great people can really shape an experience. I'm like friends with all my coworkers, and I think it aids in how well we mesh and how quickly we build things and innovate on ideas and things like that. So it's just a really special, I don't want to say bubble, but maybe it is a bubble that we get to work in, and it's really awesome. It really has, it's corny to say, a blessing to be on this team and to get this opportunity to do this sort of work.
Awesome. I think that's a beautiful wrap up for our conversation, because at the end of the day, it's not about tools or technology. It's about people and creating connections between people, and help. We're all playing our part in redesigning humanity. We're creating tools and technology to help people connect together and have a better life, nicer experience of life, doing things quicker, faster, nicer, more beautiful, more experientially. So I think that's what I have to kind of start thinking about telling my grandchildren. Not that I have them yet, but my son's growing quite old now. So yeah, maybe soon, who knows? Good point. Good reminder. And thank you so much, Anna. It's been Anna Gonzales from IBM, senior graphics designer who's working in the carbon design system. Thank you so much for joining and sharing all your insights and kind of complexities that you're having to work through as well. These things are not simple. They're not straightforward at all. There's lots to consider. It's very nuanced, and this is where design is at these days. It's much more nuanced and complex discipline than just sort of making one page look nice. It's about ecosystems of ecosystems in many respects. So well done for your amazing work, and keep at it. Thank you so much. And we will link in the comments and description to your Twitter and Carbon Design and all that stuff. So people, please follow this channel and subscribe, and also follow Anna on Twitter and Carbon Design System as well. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful week.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.